Master Immus's Transgression by Dan Abnett. Performed by Gareth Armstrong, Rupert Degas and Jonathan Keeble. Produced by Heavy Entertainment for Black Library.
I suppose you get a lot of cases like mine.
The officer did not reply. In the 10 minutes since Master Immus had been received, the officer had made very few remarks, except to announce his credentials and ask a few general questions. Master Immus had presented himself of his own free volition at the portico of the dark, unfriendly building late that afternoon. He had been invited to wait in an anteroom off the inner yard. The anteroom was cold and forlorn. The fretful fingers of individuals previously invited to wait there had marked the white plaster with a greasy patina, and pacing feet had worn the wooden floor. There were no windows, but light poked in through a trio of dingy filters. From outside, far away, Master Immus could hear the street noises of workers flooding home to their habs and their evening meals. Master Immus sat in one of the old wooden chairs provided. The clerk attended him first. The clerk led Master Immus through to a side office panelled in dark wood and sat him at a small desk. The clerk was hunched over with the weight of the stenogram built into his chest. He sat on a stool, handed Master Immus a form, and told him to read out the questions printed on it and answer them in his own words. As Master Immus spoke, haltingly at first, the clerk's bird-foot hands pecked over the keys of the stenogram and recorded his comments. The stenogram clattered like an adding machine, a sound that made Master Immus feel exceptionally sad. When the form was completed, the clerk left the office and was replaced, after a few minutes, by a second clerk. The second clerk led Master Immus into a chamber that smelled of machine heat and was cluttered with banks of whirring cogitators. The second clerk examined Master Immus's papers and copied them on one of the cogitators. Several versions of Master Immus's biographical particulars flashed up on the multiple screens for a moment and then faded into a dull green glow. This slow, silent dissolution of all he was seemed unpleasantly symbolic to Master Immus. He was taken back to the anteroom and left alone again. The daylight was ebbing. A small lamp had been lit in his absence. Master Immus waited for 20 minutes, and then the officer arrived.
Johann Immus?
The officer asked as he entered the room, reading from a data slate. Master Immus stood up.
That's me, sir.
The officer was a tall, well-made man with dark hair. He was dressed, and this came as no surprise to Johann Immus, in black clothes and a black leather coat. The officer looked Master Immus up and down with unforthcoming eyes and announced his credentials with a cursory wave of his rosette.
You've been received for inspection. Follow me, please.
Master Immus followed him obediently. He followed him across the twilit yard, in through an archway, and up an endless flight of varnished stairs. The officer opened a door and ushered Master Immus into a small room. The room had a large ornamental fireplace that looked as if it had not seen a fire in centuries. A gilt clock ticked on the mantel. There was a rug on the wooden floor and 2 plain chairs on either side of a desk. An armchair stood in one corner, a comfortable and friendly item of furniture that Master Immus never got to sit in. They took their seats on either side of the desk.
What is the nature of the crime you are confessing?
The officer asked, after studying the data slate for a few minutes.
Not a crime as such.
No?
A transgression. Yes, transgression. That is a better word altogether.
The nature of the transgression, then?
I've already explained this to the clerk.
The officer scrolled back through the slate's files.
Have you borne false witness to this statement as I read it?
No, sir.
Were you coerced, invited, or urged to make this report?
No, sir. I have come here of my own free volition. I said as much.
That is noted here, strenuously. You made that point several times during the preliminary examinations.
I simply wanted to be clear. I was persuaded to come here by my own conscience, nothing else.
The officer was silent for a moment.
You say you have been suborned by ruinous powers, drawn into evil and set upon an unholy task.
Master Immus nodded.
I suppose you get a lot of cases like mine. Everything must be held carefully to account. I am an indentured bookkeeper and a citizen of Imperial Hesperus, the latter an honor I hold even more dear than my work at Slocha and Daviov-Esi. My father was keeper of books for Slocha and Daviov, and his before him. My work, like theirs, involves the enumeration of company accounts, the allocation of funds, the scrutiny of audits, and the day-to-day upkeep of financial income and outgoings. I have held my post for 62 years and run a department of 18 underkeepers. No, I have no wife, no kin to speak of. My work is my life. Slocha and Daviov, an illustrious auction house, surely you've heard of it. Well, it maintains offices in the Garcelle Commercia just off the Place 14th Jaumier. In the main, we deal with antique furnishings, silks, samotar ware, Brashin monokins, and fine arts. The sale rooms are on Varsenson Street beside their lifter depot. They're open fair sales every mainstay and specialist auctions every other sol day. Occasionally, we hold irregular fetes for particular customers or particular treasures. Last Gorgon's Day, we offered a list that included 8 small Auslite busts by Sambriano Kelchi and a series of humaniques from the Jacquero ruins on Tornish. No, sir, I am no connoisseur. My salary does not provide me with the funds to collect or speculate. But funds are my business. I am painstaking and exact in my work. I would never wish to cause Master Slocha or Master Daviov professional embarrassment by misplacing a decimal point or wrongly adding a column of figures. This is why I have come. I do not make mistakes. Well, now you ask, we come to the meat of it, I suppose. Last sol day, I set out to review the quarterly accounts. The year-end looms, and the imperial tithe statements must be returned correctly. I found an error. Well, not an error, so much as an aberration. Something that could not be accounted for. It was an idle annoyance at first, but the more I studied the pages of the ledger, the more peculiar it became. There was a void, you see. A void, a gap, or empty place in the flow of the accounts that defied explanation. It was as if a page or two was missing from my ledger. No, not at all. This was the master ledger. Only I had access to it. Sir, you belittle my craft with such a question. I keep books, and I have kept books my whole life. I am a creature of accuracy. It was not simply a matter of a creeping error, a stray subtotal. There were figures missing, simply missing, and yet a page or two on the books balanced seamlessly, as if there had been no hole. This is what I mean by the word void. Numbers are my language, my life. I know when they're lying. There was a void in the accounts, and the more I struggled to identify it, the more the figures hid it from me. It was as if they were closing ranks to conceal the truth. Why have I come to you with a bookkeeping error? Sir, again you mock me. It was no error. I reviewed and recalculated. I redid the accounts 8 times. As I added to this column and subtracted from that, the numbers began to betray me. They became numbers that I did not understand. Sir, I believe I have calculated something that should not be. I believe I have found the number of ruin.
He regarded Master Johann Immus for a moment. Such a small man, shriveled by age, his sparrow bones lost in heavy robes that had evidently been cut to fit his father or his grandfather. The gilt clock ticked on the mantel. Its face had no hands, a simple ordo trick. The constant, measured ticking was all that mattered. Tock, 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 flicking time away without a trace of its passage on the enamelled face. Guilt got them all in the end. Immus possessed a small, neat face with a wide slit mouth that might have revealed a toothy grin had the circumstances been different. His hair was straggly and white, and he wore half-moon eyeglasses. His knuckles bulged with arthritis.
The number of ruin.
Immus nodded.
That is my transgression. Will it be painless?
Will what be painless?
My punishment. I presume, well, censure is inadequate. Will it be burning? Poison?
The officer had been making notes in a small copybook. He dipped his pen into the desk's power well.
Do you believe you have committed a crime, sir?
No, not at all, but I believe I have become a crime. I am a criminal thing.
I see.
Master Immus sat forward and adjusted his eyeglasses.
I see you are quite a young man, sir. Will this have to go to a superior?
My superior?
Yes, sir. I imagine something this grave...
My master's name is Hapshant. He is indisposed, an old ailment. I hold the rank of interrogator. As I told you, I can deal with this matter.
Oh, good. That's good. Very good. So, how will you proceed?
The officer stared at Master Immus.
Forgive me, Immus. You don't seem alarmed at all by this process.
Alarmed? Of course I'm alarmed. I'm terrified. I've been terrified of this day all my life.
Why?
Because it happens to us all sooner or later, doesn't it? Every day of my working life I have walked to work up Sarum Street and come by this place so dark and unfriendly. I never pass it without a shudder. It is mortality. It is the fate that awaits us all should we cross the line. Do you think it was easy coming here today? No, sir. It has taken me a week to find the confidence. This afternoon, as I raised my hand to rap at the door, my courage almost fled. But I am a true citizen of Imperial Hesperus. I am a true son of the Emperor. It was my duty to report this no matter what fate awaits me.
The officer nodded. The clock ticked.
Tell me what you understand by the number of ruin.
Master Immus sat back and shrugged.
It is an impossible number, an abomination. It is a notation of filthy power. Numbers own power, you see. My father raised me to respect 3 and 7, 13, and the triple sixes, the primes, the constants. But the number of ruin, that is the number of the war.
Immus looked to one side and then the other, as if in fear of being overheard. The officer nodded his head.
So Hapshant has taught me. Can you show me the number? Can you write it down?
Are you mad?
This room is warded, and I am armed. Can you show me the number?
Master Immus took a data slate from his robe pocket. It was battered and worn from use. He activated it and entered a series of digits into the display.
There are the accounts.
He paused before handing the slate over.
I have selected the key section. Please be careful.
The officer held out his hand.
Show it to me, please, sir.
Master Immus hesitated.
What did you say your name was, young man?
Eisenhorn. Interrogator Eisenhorn of the Emperor's Holy Ordos. Why?
Please be careful with this, Interrogator Eisenhorn.
Master Immus handed the old data slate to the officer. The officer looked at the screen with a slight frown. The gilt clock stopped ticking. A strange silence filled the room. The officer began to say, and caught fire. Blue flames, as hot as a burner torch, consumed his skin and roasted the flesh off his bones until nothing remained except dripping, blackened meat and a charred skull wrenched into a rictus by heat-tightened sinews. The data slate dropped onto the desk from a smoking skeletal hand with a thump. The officer's clothing was untouched. The flames guttered out, and the scorched corpse slumped forward with a crack of dry ligaments. Immus got up and backed away. His eyes were wide. He fought back a terrible desire to urinate.
Someone! Anyone! Help me!
Immus reached the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. He knocked on it, gingerly, as if hoping someone on the other side might open it without being put to too much trouble. A hand took his arm.
Please sit down, Master Immus.
Master Immus started rather badly and recoiled with such surprise he banged his elbows and the back of his head against the door. The officer, who was not burned in any way, was standing in front of him.
Master Immus?
Master Immus began to shake. Then he started to hiccup. He continued to stare at the officer.
What did you see?
You were on fire. You caught fire. The fire burned you until you were dead.
Ah, an illusion, that's all. Necessary to the work.
Necessary? Necessary how? To what work?
To my work.
The officer gestured towards the chair Immus had vacated. He paused. His tone became more sympathetic.
I apologize. I have shaken you, haven't I?
Master Immus shrugged and managed a small, dry laugh.
Indeed. I've never seen a man combust before. I've never even seen a man die. How was the illusion done? What was the point of frightening me?
The officer's sympathetic air melted.
I'm not about to answer any questions, sir. All the questions will be mine.
There were a great many of them. They came at Master Immus so rapidly he became rather flustered. The officer asked him the names of his parents and his votation numeral, and inquired of his political leanings. He asked Master Immus to account for his whereabouts on certain dates stretching back 2 years. He asked if Master Immus could operate a cogitator, if he held keys to the auction house premises, if he had ever been off-world, and where his family originated from. Master Immus attempted to answer as best he could. Sometimes a new question came at him before the last answer had been completely recited.
Is there a record of public misdemeanors in your family? How long have you resided at your current address? Can you detail your diet in general terms? Are you receiving Medicaid treatment for any ailment? Have you ever been to Ausselberg? How many languages do you speak? How many languages do you read? Do you dream? What do you dream about? How often do you attend Templum services? Have you ever taken the standard Psychana test? Have you ever been in trouble before?
Am I in trouble now?
He was made to wait in the anteroom again. Night had fallen. The lamp, almost out of promethium, fluttered valiantly. The officer came to get him and led him out into the street. The evening was warm and humid. Master Immus could smell the roasting and poaching and frying underway in the kitchens of the local eating houses. A few pedestrians passed by along the pavement under the street lamps.
Where are we going?
What did I tell you about questions?
Master Immus pursed his lips and shrugged. 2 men joined them from the dark building. One was an old, shuffling being in long, dark robes. The other was a young man, of an age and mode of dress that matched the officer's. This man was more handsome, however, more genial in his countenance.
Is this the fellow?
The officer nodded.
Let's process this, Gregor. I have plans for tonight.
They walked off down the street. The officer and the other young man walked on either side of Master Immus, like an escort of jailers walking a convict to the scaffold. The old hunched man followed them.
We will inspect your ham.
Of course. It's not far.
Master Immus took out his keys and opened the deadbolts of his door one by one. A baby was crying loudly on the floor below, and the stairwell was pungent with the odour of steamed cabbage. Mistress Elva, from down the landing, came out and made a point of sweeping her front step so she could get a good look at the dark men Master Immus had brought home with him. As Master Immus finished the business of unlocking, the officer's companion turned to look at Mistress Elva.
Are these your eyes, good wife? I found them in the back of my head.
Mistress Elva bridled and went inside. The young man laughed.
Don't start, Titus.
The other man leaned against the wall.
Nosy old bitch.
48.
Said the old man, lurking behind them.
48 what?
The officer turned to face him.
Steps. 2 flights of 24, a square spruce not local. Vitrine glass in the lamp housings, though some of them have been replaced by cheaper alternatives.
And this is pertinent how?
The old man shrugged with a bionic hiss.
Oh, it's not.
Master Immus opened the door. He felt rather ashamed of the musty smell that breathed out of the doorway. The officer produced a docket.
Sign this.
What is it?
A waiver. Interrogator Endor and I are about to search your residence.
Master Immus initialed the docket. The 2 interrogators entered the hab. Master Immus followed them, and the old man shuffled in behind him. The old man sniffed.
Sick vinegar.
What?
Sick vinegar and K leaf.
I use the vinegar to clean my fingers. It's the only thing that gets the ink out.
The only thing that gets the ink out?
And I use K-leaf in a paste to regrind my quills.
You don't smoke it then?
Smoke it? Why?
As a balm against rheumatic inflammation?
No.
Ah.
The old man shuffled forwards into the living room, his legs creaking like a servitor's. He was terribly hunched, and his augmetic eyewear clicked as it hunted.
You should. It's very medicinal. It'll help your hip.
My hip.
You walk with a slight counter-rotation, 2 centimeters short on each right step. You shuffle, sir. I presume it is rheumatism.
Master Immus felt quite dismayed. These 3 men had intruded into his home. The officer was in his bedroom overturning the mattress. The other man, Endor, was in the little side kitchen, sniffing the contents of various jars. No one new had been inside Master Immus's hab for years. It felt like a violation.
Are you the Inquisitor?
Me? Bless you, no. Why would you think that?
I just assumed.
The old man shuffled over to the sideboard.
Fused fit sampwood, no maker's mark, a vase.
He picked the vase up.
Please be careful.
The old man ignored him. He held the vase in his spindly fingers.
Shemeter ware, 3rd dynasty.
He looked inside it.
Ooh, paper clips.
The officer came back from the bedroom holding several books.
You have books.
Is there something wrong with that?
You like poetry?
The early Imperials, the Tacits, is that a crime? This is.
Endor walked in from the side kitchen with something in his hand. There was an ugly, almost triumphant grin on his face. Master Immus realized that what he first registered as handsome in the features of the officer's companion was in fact a cruel arrogance. Interrogator Endor was accustomed to winning.
What is it?
Buried at the bottom of a jar of caffeine.
Endor held out his hand. 6 little pills lay in his palm.
Yellows.
Most perturbatory.
They're not mine.
Master Immus sat on the threadbare couch, tugging at his robe.
They're not mine. Not mine, not at all. I don't use that sort of thing. I wouldn't even know how to get that sort of thing.
Zespere Street, or the dealers that frequent the depot.
Be quiet, Amos.
Eisenhorn stared down at Master Imus.
This is a bad turn of events for you. It compounds things.
They're not mine. How many times do I have to say it?
They were in your kitchen.
Endor seemed to be relishing Master Imus's discomfort.
I didn't put them there.
Huh? So someone just came in and hid them in your caffeine, did they?
That must be it. I can think of no other explanation.
I've had enough. Let's process him.
Slow down, Titus.
He's up to his ears in it.
Slow down, I said.
I had plans for tonight.
Titus Endor scowled.
Fantastic for you. Give me the tablets.
Endor tipped the yellows into the officer's hand. The officer sat down on the couch next to Master Imus.
Get lost.
Endor went out onto the landing to smoke a low stick. The old man shuffled away to examine the books in the bedroom.
I'll be frank. This is going badly for you, sir.
I realize that.
The matter of the accounts is the main thing, but the yellows, they complicate the matter.
I understand.
They are a prohibited substance, that's the first thing. The second thing is, they're yellows.
I don't know what you mean.
This isn't the first time I've inspected an individual's hab and found evidence of drug use. Obscura, Gladstones, that sort of business. But yellows, they're mind expanders. We typically find them in circumstances connected to cult activity.
Cult?
We often find them in association with prohibited texts and deviant knowledge. A man who has the number of ruin might use yellows to help him fathom it and master its use.
Master Imus put his head in his hands.
They're not mine.
Is the Sacker yours?
The what?
I found it between the Frobisher and the early Tacites in your bedroom.
I don't know what an Sacker is. I don't know its significance.
It's a prescribed text. It defines the methodological use of psychotropic drugs in gnomic enlightenment. So that was just placed there too, was it? Someone just put it there.
They must have done.
The officer sighed.
Master Imus, you brought a matter to our attention, a serious matter. The numbers you showed me in the ledger are quite pernicious.
And I came of my own free volition, remember that.
I do. And that leaves me with two possibilities. You are a practicing heretic with a pathological desire to be caught and condemned. Or, Master Imus, you have been set up to take the fall for someone. There's one last thing I would like to do. It's necessary for my work.
What is it, sir?
The officer turned to look at him. His face was no longer human. It was a snout of rancid, gnashing teeth, spatulate and broad with sharp edges. The snout opened, drooling spit, and seemed about to bite Master Imus's face clean off. Master Johann Imus smelled the pit stink of the warp and the shadows of dark places where no human ever willingly walked. He saw a monstrous horror lunging at him, pallid tentacles whipping up out of the distended throat. He cried out in fear and wet himself.
I'm sorry I had to do that, Master Imus.
The officer wiped his mouth. Titus Endor came in from the stairhead.
Thrown, Gregor, I felt that.
Sorry. Would you and Amos please stay here and tidy the place? And help Master Imus to get cleaned up.
I had plans for tonight.
And now I have plans of my own.
Titus Endor stayed until midnight, and then made some vague excuse and left. The old man remained with Master Imus until dawn. They played regicide and talked of antiques. The officer returned at first light.
The matter is settled. Thank you for your cooperation.
When Master Imus went to work the next day, he found that Slotcher and Daviofetsi had been closed down. With immediate effect and until further notice, the seal on the door said. Most of the staff had gathered in the street, bewildered and despondent.
Master Slotcher was shot.
Muttered one of the underkeepers.
He was shot last night by the Inquisition.
Another confirmed.
Oh, dear.
3 days later, the officer called on Master Immus at his hab.
Sit down, please.
I've come to tell you that you've been formally cleared of all charges.
Even my transgression?
Even that.
I'm very relieved.
Your employer was conducting bad business, heretical business, in fact. He was engaged in the importation of illicit texts under the cover of the auction house's primary dealings. We've been after him for a year. We had no proof of his activities.
I see.
Your employer knew we were onto him, of course. He set you up to act as a distraction. He wanted us to concentrate on you instead of him. And we would have, if you hadn't been so honest as to bring the matter to our attention.
Did you kill Master Slotcher?
I'm afraid I did.
The officer rose.
Well, I must be on my way.
What happens now?
What do you mean?
I have no job to go to. The auction house is finished. What will become of me?
I'm sorry, sir. That's not my problem.
The officer turned to leave.
I think I might be allowed to ask one question in all fairness.
Ask it.
Why was it necessary?
Why was what necessary?
Why was it necessary to scare me?
Fear simplifies the mind, Master Immus. It is so strong and pure, it quite empties the head and removes all barriers and falsehoods. I scared you so I could read the truth inside you, the honest part of you that you could not dissemble. I'm sorry about that.
You're a psyker, then?
Yes.
Ah, I see. If you can read into the future, tell me. I have no job and no references. I am too old and set in my ways to retrain. I have no means of support. I came forward of my own free volition, helped you hunt out a heretic, and proved my innocence. And I am left the poorer for it? What do I do now?
I'm a mind reader, not a clairvoyant.
Right. Thank you for your candor, anyway.
Goodbye, Master Immus.
Interrogator Eisenhorn closed the door behind him. Master Immus sat on the threadbare couch. From the floor below, he could hear a baby crying. He could hear the knock of the landlord going from hab to hab for the week's rent. Master Immus's rent dues were in the sideboard drawer. This week's and the next's, but nothing more. Master Immus was glad he had come forward, and glad he had spoken out. Duty was duty, after all. He tried to inflate some sense of civic pride in his heart, but he wished, more than anything, he had just kept himself to himself. Regia Occulta by Dan Abnett. Performed by Gareth Armstrong, Lisa Coleman, and Jonathan Keeble. Produced by Heavy Entertainment for Black Library.
I crossed over into Jarrett County via the pass at Coolbreck. Air links were down because of the cackle, so a reluctant mechanized Imperial Guard unit conveyed me from the capital as far as Coolbreck town. and then only because the Jared Commissioner had been so insistent. This was, 223 M41, and I was only just out on my own. Even then, at the very dawn of my career, I was treated with a mixture of fear and suspicion. The rosette, or the title Inquisitor, or a combination of both, fairly focused the minds of those who met me. This attitude bores me these days. Back then it gave me a sort of vulgar sensation of power. Inquisitor Flamel had been killed 6 months before in a miserable warp transit accident, and I had been posted as a locum to cover his circuit, which was the fief worlds of the Grand Banks in the coreward reaches of the Helican sub. Circuit work is a drudge, and one acts in the main as an itinerant magistrate, travelling from planetary capital to planetary capital, reviewing flotsam cases gathered in by the local authorities. Most are trivial and hardly ordo business, scares conjured up by superstition and petty disputation, though I had spent 8 weeks on New Bylaw working through a caseload that eventually exposed the traffic in low-grade, unsanctioned psychers. From New Bylaw, I went to Ignix, the smallest and most peripheral of the fief colonies, a place locally regarded as the back end of all creation. Ignix did not disappoint. Small, wet, and walled with ravines and meandering trenches created by an eternity of rainfall eroding its way down into the frothing seas. The planet is administratively divided into counties, each one millions of kilometers square. Its capital is called Foothold, for it was there the first settlers made planetfall. They were miners, mineral extraction being the only profitable occupation a man can find on Ignix. Not long into their habitation, the miners of Ignix specialized and became wet miners, panning and sifting the planet's innumerable fast waterways, many of them temporary runoffs that surge one day and are gone the next, for precious ores. Wet mining fortunes had built Foothold into a decent-sized but drab town. All the worthwhile minerals had been shipped off-world in return for hard cash, and the place had been constructed from the residue. The buildings were stained and grim, many of them fabricated from locally cast rockcrete, or a type of melter-formed pumice brick. I was put up in an airless residentiary, and went to the courthouse every day to review the pending cases. None of them deserved my attention, or even the rubber stamp of the ordos. I had been there 4 days when the cackle began. The name is a local one. A more appropriate description would be seasonal electrocorporal storms. A byproduct of Ignix's orbital variations and the virile behavior of the star it circles, the storms visit each yearly cycle and blanket the northern hemisphere with a steady, florid, electromagnetic display. The sky lights up. Corposant nests on rooftops and masts. Vox links suffer. There is a continuous sound in the air, like a dry, evil chuckle, hence the name. Some years it's mild, others it's bad. 223 was a bad year. The cackle was so fierce, it prevented any and all passage by air, including shuttle links from the lift harbor to starships at high anchor. Transfers on and off of Ignix were suspended, and I was stuck for the duration, which turned out to be 3 weeks. There was some novelty to be enjoyed at first. The flickering lights in the sky, day and night, were quite sublime, and produced certain hues that I swear I have never encountered since. But the constant dirty chuckle became onerous and tormenting, as did the rancid metallic sweat the charged air drew out of me. It was foggy and close, and I quickly wearied of getting shocks from every damn metallic object I touched or used. I came to realize why the late Flamel had made Ignix a low priority on his circuit. With the cases done with, there was little to do but wait for the cackle to subside. I read and studied and struck up passing friendships with several similarly stranded travelers living in the residentiary. Merchants, mostly. Perhaps friendships is too strong a word. I knew them well enough to share a drink, or a conversation, or a game of regicide with, but nothing more. They understood what I was, and it made them nervous around me. For the first time in my career, that vulgar sensation of power began to feel like a burden. Towards the end of the first week of enforced occupation, a message arrived from the Commissioner of Jared County. Due to the vox-out, it was brought by a biker who had run the flooding levees and wash plains of the county limits overnight. I can only assume the Commissioner had paid the man well, for he was in a poor state by the time he arrived. The foothold administrator, an old fellow called Wagner, brought the message slip to me and waited while I read it. He seems most insistent, this Commissioner.
Mal Selwyn? Oh, he's a good sort. Very dutiful. He knew you were in town on circuit duties and evidently hopes you might oblige him.
I held the slip up. Do you think this is genuine, Administrator? Wagner shrugged his sloping shoulders.
Oh, sounds like a hot one to me. What do I know? I don't have rosette training.
Selwyn, the Commissioner of Jared County, had reported a pair of killings in his township, the unimaginatively named Jared County Town. He suspected cult activity and requested an assessment by the Circuit Inquisitor. I would have dismissed it except for two facts. One, I had nothing better to do, and two, Selwyn had written, "The victims had suffered deep, random cuts and slashes to the body, having been slain by a crushing head wound. Each victim was missing its left ear." How do I get there? Can you scare up a transport for me? Wagner laughed at the idea.
In this? Oh, all right. I'll see what I can do.
The Imperial Guard took me overland to the pass in a centaur, hooded against the rain and bulked out with yellow swim bladders to allow for the fording of flash floods. The crew was not at all happy about the outing, but bit their tongues because of what and who I was. After 12 hours grinding along mud tracks and waterlogged gulches, they got me through the pass, over the iron bridge, and into Colbreck town. As we crossed the old, rusting bridge, I watched the corpusants crackle and dance across the posts and stanchions. In Colbreck town, an odious shanty backwater, transit was arranged to carry me on the next leg of my journey. The centaur turned back to foothold. I went on in a cargo 8 that had seen better days.
There's been killing, you know.
The driver mentioned conversationally. I had heard something to that effect. The driver nodded. Tiny threads of static were playing across his knuckles as he nudged the wheel.
4 dead.
I can honestly say that I quite admired Jared Commissioner Maldar Selwyn. What he lacked in almost everything, he made up for in sheer optimism. He showed me around Jared County Town personally, and made it clear he was tremendously proud of it. The town straddled 12 river threads, and it seemed to be all bridges and decking and cantilevered platforms. Habs stacked up high above the steep rain river chutes. Water throbbed and rattled and chugged down the channels through the town on its journey from the hills to the sea. As he drove me across the new bridge, Selwyn proudly explained how he had seen to its construction 5 years earlier for the benefit of the community. It was a large metal structure connecting the Commercia quarter to the merchantman residences and was evidently a boon to working practices. Before the bridge, the merchants had been obliged to take taxi boats from their homes to the Commercia every day. The river it crossed was one of the largest and most powerful bisecting Jared County town, and the new bridge was equipped with elevating sections so it could lift to admit the passage of trade ships and other water traffic coming inshore from the coast to the warehouse docks. It was an impressive piece of engineering, lit up as we rode across it by the unending light show of the cattle. Selwyn clearly worked hard to support and improve his community, at the back end of all creation though it was. We drew up on the glistening wharfs of the Commercia and got out of the bulky land car. Selwyn was a stocky man in his late 40s with thinning hair and a heavy, bushy moustache. He took a data slate out of his overcoat pocket.
All the victims were discovered in the Commercia district. Here's a plan of the locations. It seems arbitrary to me.
I agreed, but didn't say so. Is there crime scene data? Forensic material?
I'm having it processed to you.
And you've got 4 now.
2 more since I sent my message.
Is there a pattern? He shook his head.
Apart from the MO, there's no connection between the victims, except for the area they worked in. A trolley pusher, a warehouse man, a junior mercantile clerk, and a hall. We haven't been able to connect any variables. As far as we know, they didn't know each other.
But you have a theory. He nodded.
The killer lives somewhere in the Commercia.
Because?
Each killing took place at a time when the new bridge was raised. There was no crossing to the merchant district. To me, that says it must be local.
I nodded. But just a regular killer, surely, not an Ordo matter.
We've had our share of murders over the years, Inquisitor. My office handles the cases. But this, the random mutilation, the missing ears...
What do you think that signifies?
Trophy taking? Cults do like to take trophies, I understand. Ritual, I suppose. It smacks of ritual.
I reckon it might.
Yes, I thought so.
Why?
Well, you wouldn't be here otherwise.
The cackle grew more fierce as night pushed in. When we left the Commercia, rain was beginning to fall, and sirens hooted, warning that the new bridge was about to raise its hydraulic spans. The river was at flood tide. I reviewed the victims in the frosty twinkle of the town morgue. Preservation methods in Jared County were not Ordo standard. The cadavers had been dumped in bulk freezer units and came out on their gurneys caked in frost, their vulnerable tissues blackened and cold-burned.
Sorry.
Zelwyn was watching me work.
I wish our facilities could be better.
Forget about it. I used probes and skewers on the frigid bodies, sampling and measuring. The hacking wounds, some so deep they looked like claw marks, were especially ugly. They smiled like happily parted lips, their mouths full to the brim with frozen black ice.
Cult work, then? Have I got a cult here I need to deal with?
No. A hunter.
A hunter?
I nodded.
What does that mean?
Trophy taking is a hunter's quirk. An ear, a finger, a lock of hair.
But that's ritual, isn't it?
Hunters have rituals too. He looked downcast.
Not a cult thing, then.
You sound disappointed. The Jared Commissioner managed a weak smile.
Of course not. It's just that I'd hoped I was on the money. I wanted to impress you. If this is simply some nut-job serial, I've wasted your time, and I should have known better.
Not to mention, I added wickedly, that if this had been cult work, I'd have dealt with it for you. Zelwyn shook his head.
I'm sorry to have cost you a journey, sir.
I felt rather ashamed of my attitude. I put down the probe, wiped frosted blood off my gloved hand, and turned to face him. Look, I've nothing better to do. Let me help you anyway.
You do that?
He seemed rather taken aback. Of course. Why not?
Because you're... you know...
An Inquisitor? Inquisitors don't like serial killings any more than Commissioners do. I have certain skills, Commissioner Zelwyn. I think I can bring this animal down. He smiled. It was the warmest, most genuine thing I'd seen in years. I was just trundling the last corpse back into its freezer when a militia officer came into the morgue and whispered something to Zelwyn. He turned to look at me. I felt his pain. I mean, I actually felt it. The psyker talents that would later serve me and shape my career were still raw and unfocused in those days, but my empathetic function nevertheless resounded at his distress.
While we were busy here...
Talk to me, Zelwyn. He took a deep breath.
While we were fussing around here, there's been another death.
Is the body still in situ? He nodded.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see it. We had to wait for 5 minutes while the new bridge lowered its spans to let us cross into the Commercia district. Zelwyn let one of his militiamen drive us. The Jared Commissioner's hands were shaking too much to be trusted. Corposant lit up the bridge. The sky made strange colors that twisted and turned. Rain fell. The river below us rushed along, rich in sediment, towards the distant sea. Lana Howie had worked the wharf for 12 years and was a regular face at the drink stops and taverns along the hem of the Commercia. She'd once been popular, a fast girl with good looks and impressive legs, but the work had taken its toll. In the months before her death, she had earned her income turning tricks for specialist customers, men who were more interested in what she was prepared to do, rather than the way she looked. Now she was dead. Her body lay on the ground of a warehouse just off Commercia, Maine. It had been discovered by a night watchman. Slim, too slim, and wearing too much makeup, she lay naked and awkward under the overbright portable lamps. The blood from the deep slashing incisions had pooled out under her in a slick. Her left ear was missing.
Same as the others.
Zelwyn shuddered. No. I crouched beside the body.
No?
No, she's still... I wanted to say alive, but that would have been wrong. She wasn't alive anymore, but she was fresh. Fresh compared to the freezer-burned residue Zelwyn had shown me earlier.
The hunter again?
Looks like it. The ear, you notice?
Why do you think it's a hunter, Inquisitor Eisenhorn?
The slash wounds, you see? So deep. These are the kind of deep cuts that a hunter might administer to accelerate decomposition. A kill he doesn't want, and which he wants to rot away quickly. Zelwyn pursed his lips.
What are you going to do now, sir?
I'm going to ask you and your people to get out of this place. Withdraw to a 60-meter perimeter.
Why?
Don't ask me that, Commissioner.
I want to stay.
On your own head, then. Get your people out. Later on in my career, I only ever undertook auto seances when I had a properly qualified astro-telepath to assist me. Such acts can take a toll. Back then, I was young and headstrong and full of my own energy and will. It's a wonder I ever survived. Bolt the door. Zelwyn obliged. His men had gone. Do what I say and don't interrupt me. He stood back near the heavy warehouse door, watching. I knelt down beside the hacked corpse and sighed. Outside, the cackle sputtered and pulsed. Lana Howie. I felt Zelwyn open his mouth to ask why in the name of the throne I was talking to a dead body. I think it was about then that he finally woke up to what was going on. I sensed fear bubbling up inside him, along with a strong desire to be outside with his men after all. He'd never seen anything like this done before. Lana Howie. The warehouse air took on the glossy, cold feel of hyper-reality. The light refined in clarity, and small details became impossibly sharp. The various odors of the place, soot, rockrete, oil, sacking, thinners, and the body itself, were suddenly more concentrated, more pronounced.
What am I doing here?
Asked the late Lana Howie. Lana Howie?
Hello, mister. What's your pleasure then, sir?
Lana, my name is Gregor.
That's a lovely name. Gregor. You're a handsome one for sure, Gregor. What can I do for you tonight?
Where are you, Lana Howie?
I'm in the warehouse with you, silly man. This is my place. Don't you fret. It's quiet here. Discreet. You're a regular, aren't you? I know your face.
You've never seen me before, Lana Howie. You'll never see me again.
I doubt that.
She sniggered. Her chuckle was the scratchy glee of the cattle.
I'll bet you'll be back again for more soon enough.
I need you to focus, Lana Howie.
Focus? What? Why'd you keep using my name? My whole name like that? Is that your thing, mister?
Lana. I felt Selwyn fighting back an urge to throw open the door bolts and run. I really hadn't wanted him to be here in the first place. All he could see was me kneeling beside the body. He could not see what I could see. An after-image of the victim had appeared to me. She was wearing a cheap, revealing dress and had taken a seat on a nearby freight trunk. One leg crossed over the other. The raised foot was swinging impatiently. Lana, can you hear me?
How do you know my name, mister?
Administratum files. Lana, who was it?
Who was it that what? Come on, I've got punters waiting. What are you on about?
Lana, please let me see. Who did this to you?
Who did what to me? Look, I haven't got all night. Show me some money, mister.
I reached into my pocket and produced 3 crowns. The air was very cold. My breath was steaming, so were the open wounds on the corpse in front of me. On the trunk, Image Lana swung her leg.
That'll do it. What do you want? Full service? All the stuff?
She stood up abruptly and reached down to pull her dress off over her head. It was only then she seemed to notice the body on the floor. The Image stared down at it for a long time, her hands frozen in the act of bunching up her dress to drag it over and off. When she looked at me again, her eye makeup was blotted and running.
When?
Not long ago.
Oh, Thorn! What did I ever do to deserve that?
Nothing. Lana, I want to know who it was. Will you show me? She showed me. She showed me, her voice growing steadily quieter and quieter. And when she was done, she faded altogether without any protest, casting me one last hurt look with her makeup-stained eyes. I took off my storm coat and laid it over the corpse. Outside, dawn was no more than an hour away. The rain had eased off, and the cackle had dropped in intensity. Selwyn stood by the waiting militia transports, taking repeated draws from an old hip flask. When I walked up, he offered it to me. I took a big swallow.
Are you...
I need a moment. The work had drained me, not so much sapping my will as abrading my emotions.
Can the details move in, at least?
I nodded. Several militia officers and 2 coroners with a stretcher went into the warehouse at Selwyn's nod. After a few minutes, someone brought me my coat. I gestured to Selwyn and walked away in the direction of the new bridge. It's a good thing I stayed. This turns out to be an Ordo matter after all.
A cult?
No, and not a hunter either. At least it could be either of those things, but that's not what makes it an Ordo matter. We're dealing with a Regia Occulta.
Hidden way?
He translated. Selwyn was no fool. He had High Gothic. That's the literal translation. In the Ordo Malleus, it has a more specific meaning.
Go on.
A Regia Occulta is a pathway, a tunnel or portal, if you like, that links our reality with that of the warp.
Is it a deliberate thing?
Perhaps. Cults and heretics do sometimes open them deliberately, but it could be a natural occurrence. Most are. The fabric of space is thin in places, you see, and sometimes there are leaks. He shook his head, and a sad smile appeared under his heavy moustache.
I don't actually know much about the warp, sir.
Nor should you, Commissioner. It's forbidden law. I'm just telling you what you need to know. There is a Regia Occulta in Jared County town, and it's right here. It took Zelwyn just a few minutes to have the bridge and its feeder roads closed off and barricaded by the militia. Another hour, and it would have been teeming with traffic heading in for work.
Can you tell me why this only happens when the bridge is up? I mean, surely that would block a crossing.
I'll do better than tell you. I'll show you. We took up a position at the Commercia end. Me, Zelwyn, and 4 men from the militia armed with powerful auto rifles. At my nod, the Commissioner signaled to the bridge machine room on the far bank, and the operators engaged the hydraulics. Ponderously, with a dull squeal like gates opening, the massive spans began to lift. The cackle fluoresced in the dawn sky over our heads. Blue ropes of fizzling corpuscent writhed and trickled like snakes around the iron finials of the bridge towers, and traced their way along the rising edges of the gigantic metal spans. The hydraulics cut out when the spans were at a standard lifted position, at about 40 degrees from the horizontal. We waited, looking up the steep metal slope of the span facing us. Below us, out of sight, the fast-running river gurgled and hissed. We waited for 10 minutes. Corpuscent gathered in increasingly heavy ribbons around the raised tips of the bridge span, as if attracted there in concentration, like lightning drawn to a conductor. There was a dry electric crack, and we smelled ozone. One of the militiamen pointed. A whip of corpuscent had flicked out from the tip of one span and connected with the tip of the other, like a squiggle of electrostatic voltage crackling between 2 insulated orbs. It remained there, jerking and sizzling, like a bright twisting rope, tying the 2 halves of the raised bridge together. This feature had not been evident in the patchy disposition Lana Howie had showed me, but I suddenly felt I had discerned the key mechanism of the infernal Regia Occulta. One of the militiamen started to say something, but I already knew it was happening. The hairs on my neck had risen. I felt something akin to a ball of ice in my stomach and a searing pain behind my eyes. The killer came into view. He simply manifested out of nowhere, as if the air had parted like a curtain and let him through. He appeared high up on the span ahead of us and began to plod down the steep slope. He did not see us at first. We heard his feet slapping heavily on the metal roadway. Though humanoid, he was not human. I was the largest man in our party, and he was twice my mass and half my height again. He came wrapped up in a heavy, ragged cloak of animal skins, with a hood drawn up. His shoulders were very broad. The pain behind my eyes was getting worse by the second. I could barely focus.
Kill it!
We opened fire. 4 military-grade auto rifles, firing reinforced rounds with 50% more grain in them than standard. Zelwyn's lasgun and my Transvask assault pistol. The noise was stunning. The muzzle flash, the strobing flutter. The killer was dead in just a few seconds. Our firepower tore him apart and shredded his foul cloak, though he possessed such astonishing strength that he actually managed to walk into our fusillade a step or 2, trying to shrug it off before it overcame him. He fell heavily and rolled down the slope. He was a mature orc warrior. Released by his spasming paws, a huge cleaver and a large metal cudgel lay on the roadway beside him. We approached slowly. Greenskins are notoriously hard to kill, and though we had blown this one wide open, I fired 3 more rounds into its skull to be on the safe side. Ichor, almost black in the dawn light, ran down the slope. The mangled corpse showed signs of body paint, tribal markings, and lots of crude piercings and bangles. Fresh human ears were strung around its throat on a wire.
A greenskin? But this isn't green space. There haven't been any orcs in this sub for generations.
It didn't come from this sub. I was finding it hard to speak or concentrate. The pain behind my eyes was even worse than before. It felt like a hot wire. It came from whatever random site this Regia Occulta connects to. The beast went out hunting one day and ended up here. We'll never know, I fancy. Where?
Inquisitor? Inquisitor Eisenhorn!
I felt Zelwyn's hand catch my arm. The pain behind my eyes had turned into full-blown psych agony. I could barely stand, let alone speak. And I really wanted to speak. I needed to. I needed to yell out, "It's not over!" The Regia Occulta was still open. While we had been standing there, gawping at the orc's cadaver, a second one had walked in through the hidden way. For such a massive thing, it moved very fast. I moved like lead, transfixed by the pain. The seething warp gate was lancing into my receptive mind. I heard a feral roar and smelled a foul animal scent. I fell, shoved aside, I think. An auto rifle fired. The orc slew the first militiaman as he landed amongst us, splitting the fellow straight down through the crown with his jagged cleaver. The man collapsed under the force of the blow, his sectioned skull spilling open as the blade jerked back out, his heels drumming the ground. The orc caught another man by the throat, yanked him off his feet, and bit away his face. It is awful to reflect that this unfortunate lived for at least another 10 minutes. The orc broke the back of a third militiaman with a stinging cudgel blow before making off in great bounding leaps towards the unlit buildings of the Commercia. Zelwyn and the sole remaining militiaman fired after it. The man with a broken back lay on the ground, screaming.
Eisenhorn!
Lower the bridge. I didn't want to use my will on the poor fellow, but I had no choice. My mouth wouldn't work. Zelwyn wet himself as my mind intruded upon his. To his credit, he rallied and signaled the machine room. The new bridge slowly rattled and clanked back into place. The corpuscent charge between the spans shorted out and vanished as the opposite ends touched. My mind cleared at once, the pain draining back. The Regia Occulta was shut. Blood had streamed out of my nose and soaked the front of my jacket. I got up and ran towards the warehouses. The orc had vanished from sight. I had to find it before it found anyone else. A green skin is dangerous enough. This one was enraged, possibly wounded, and knew it was cut off and pursued by its mortal foe, man. Zelwyn ran after me. The remaining militiaman stayed put, too shocked to move, his rifle limp in his white-knuckled hands. Get back, Zelwyn! Gather your militia in full force! Like hell! He shouted over at the units waiting behind the barricades, and they moved forwards after us. We entered the most likely venue, a warehouse stacked with mineral hoppers. Glow globes hung from the rafters, but not all of them worked. Frail daybreak glimmered through the roof lights.
In here!
I held up my hand for hush. The place was quiet, except for the mocking chuckle of the cackle. I tried to reach out with my mind, but I was drained, and no human psyker can read the greenskin mind. They are blunt to us. I took a deep breath instead and smelled the air. Mineral stink, wet rocks, and a hint, just a hint, of animal odor. We edged forwards. I saw dark, wet spots on the rock-creek floor, leading between the piled hoppers. Unless someone had recently carried a leaky Promethean drum through the place, Zelwyn had managed to wound the creature right enough. I touched one of the spots. It oozed warmth.
It's here.
Zelwyn already knew that. It had come out of the shadows, nightmarishly silent for something so big, and seized him by the throat. I turned, slowly. The orc had pulled the Jared Commissioner in against its massive chest, like a mother hugging a baby to its breast. Its left paw entirely encircled the man's neck. Zelwyn's eyes were wide, and his face was pale. The orc raised its right hand and gently rested the massive cleaver on Zelwyn's scalp. Tiny trickles of blood ran down Zelwyn's face. The bull orc's yellow eyes, deep in the brow-ridged sockets, glared at me. Its heavy, flaccid lips wrinkled and twitched. Its tongue, huge and greasy, worked behind its rotting peg teeth. Each one of those teeth was the size of my palm. The orc was not a bright beast, but it was smart enough, instinctive enough, to recognize its predicament. It was bargaining with me. A life for a life. This much I knew. Otherwise, Zelwyn would have been dead already. I thought about taking a shot, but dared not risk hitting the Commissioner. I was too spent, and it was no time to try my aim. Besides, greenskins are notoriously hard to kill. Even if I hit it, one round from a Tronsvass would not do the trick. All I had was my will. I couldn't impel the orc in any way, but Zelwyn was a different matter. Without hesitation, I reached into the Commissioner's panicking mind. He was still clutching his las pistol, dangling at his side. I squeezed his finger for him. The shot flew clean through the arch of the orc's slabby right foot. The greenskin convulsed in pain, but I already had a grip on Zelwyn's motor function, and I threw him forwards. I felt his astonishment as his body acted without his permission. He flew out of the orc's briefly weakened grip so fast and hard, he careered forwards and bounced, face first, off the hopper to my right. I was already firing, my weapon braced in a two-handed grip. I emptied the assault pistol's clip into the greenskin's chest, filling the air with drenching black mist and driving the monster back into the stack of mineral hoppers behind it. It smashed heavily into the metal siding, but remained on its feet. I ejected the dead clip and let it drop and clatter onto the floor as I snapped home a reload from my coat pocket. I tore off the second clip in one go, firing into the orc's face and neck. The back of its vast skull banged repeatedly against the hopper behind it. Spray patterns of ichor splashed out across the hopper's side. It swayed, then took another step towards me. Oh, for throne's sake, just die. It died. The stack of hoppers, unsettled by the repeated impacts, creaked and toppled, crushing the orc in an avalanche of rock ore, clinker, and iron crates. The noise was deafening. I shielded my face. Dust billowed up and slowly settled. I helped the Jared Commissioner to his feet. He was quaking badly. Both of us were coated with a film of rock dust. He looked at the mangled heap of wreckage where dark, clotted ichor seeped out from under the heaps of spoil.
Holy shit.
There was no way in the understanding of the Ordos anyway, to close a Regia Occulta. I made it quite clear to Zelwyn that the new bridge should never, ever be raised again. For it was that very raising during the cackle that produced the unique combination of effects necessary for the Regia Occulta to function. He needed no persuasion. The day before I left Jared County Town, he had the machine room dismantled and the heavy gauge hydraulics uncoupled. I understand, though I cannot confirm the fact, that the new bridge was swept away in a freak flood tide some years later. It was never replaced. The Regia Occulta never reoccurred in Jared County Town. Commissioner Zelwyn, who went on to serve his community for 6.5 decades, kept one of the orc cleavers on his office wall, and enjoyed telling visitors that the dried blood on its points was his. The morning I left, Zelwyn came to see me off.
I hope I never see you again, Inquisitor.
He shook my hand.
I hope so too, Commissioner.
He paused.
Well, I meant that in a good way.
So did I. I crossed over into Foothold County via the pass at Coolbreck. The reluctant motorized unit of the Imperial Guard was there to meet me, the engine of the Centaur idling. They weren't glad to see me, but I was glad to see them. The cackle was dying away, and I would soon be gone from Ignix. The cackle was dying away, but it insisted on having the last laugh. Many years later, at the end of my life, the mocking elements of Ignix would return to haunt me again. But this was, 223 M41, and I was only just out on my own.
Thorn Wishes Talon by Dan Abnett. Performed by Gareth Armstrong, Lisa Coleman, Jane Collingwood, Rupert Degas, and Jonathan Keeble. Produced by Heavy Entertainment for Black Library.
The past never lets us go. It is persistent and unalterable. The future, however, is aloof, a stranger. It stands with its back to us, mute and private, refusing to communicate what it knows or what it sees. Except to some. On Nova Derma, deep in the leech-infested forests of the eastern Telgs, there is a particular grotto into which the light of the rising day star falls once every 38 days. There, by means of some secret ministry and ritual craft that I have no ready wish to understand, the blistered seers of the divine phratery coax the reluctant future around until they can see its face in their silver mirrors and hear its hushed, unwilling voice. It is my fervent hope that what it has to say to them is a lie.
That night, the waste world called Malinter had 6 visitors. They left their transport dark and hook-winged on a marshy floodplain slightly bowed over to starboard, where the landing claws had sunk into the ooze. They proceeded west on foot. A storm was coming, and it was not entirely natural. They walked through streamers of white fog, crossing outcrops of green fields, lakes of moss and dank watercourses choked with florid lichens. The sky shone like filthy tinted glass. In the distance, a pustular range of hills began to vanish in the rain blur of the encroaching elements. Lightning flashed like sparks off flint or remote laser fire. They had been on the surface for an hour and had just sighted the tower when the first attempt was made to kill them. There was a rattle, almost indistinguishable from the doom roll of the approaching thunder, and bullets whipped up spray from the mud at the feet of the tallest visitor. His name was Harlan Nail. His tall, broad physique was wrapped in a black mesh body glove. His head was shaved, apart from a simple goatee. He raised the heavy Ecutor pistol he had been carrying in his right fist and made a return of fire into the gathering dark. In answer, several more unseen hostiles opened up. The visitors scattered for cover.
Were you expecting this?
Nail crouched behind a quartz boulder and snapped shots off over it.
I didn't know what to expect.
The answer came telepathically from Nail's master and seemed far from reassuring.
How many?
20 meters away from him, another big man called Zeph Matthewin shouted back from cover.
6.
Matthewin was as imposing as Nail, but his skin was dark, the color of varnished hardwood. His black hair was plaited into strands and beaded. Both men had been bounty hunters in their time. Neither followed that profession any longer.
Make it 7!
Contradicted Kara Swole as she wriggled up beside Nail, keeping her head low. She was a short, compact woman with cropped red hair. Her voluptuous figure was currently concealed beneath a long black leather duster with a fringe of Larisil fur around the neck.
7! 6!
Kara Swole had been a dancer-acrobat before she joined the band, and ordinarily she would defer to the combat experience of the two ex-hunters. But she had an ear for these things.
Listen! 3 auto rifles!
She identified, counting off on her fingers.
2 las guns, a pistol, and that!
She drew Nail's attention to a distinctive plunk-plunk.
That's a stubber!
Nail nodded and smiled.
6!
Kara is correct. There are 7. How can we deal with them, please?
Their master's mind voice seemed unusually terse and impatient. Not a good sign. One of several not good signs that had already distinguished this night. The 2 other members of the team sheltered against a gravel shelf some distance to Nail's left. Their names were Patience Kiss and Carl Thonius. A slight, fussy, well-bred young man, Thonius held the rank of interrogator and was technically the master's second-in-command. He had drawn a compact pistol from inside his beautifully tailored coat, but was too busy complaining about the weather, the mud, and the prospect of death by gunshot wounds to use it. Patience Kiss suggested he might like to shut up. She was a slender, pale woman dressed in high leather boots of black leather, a bell skirt of grey silk, and an embroidered black leather shirt. Her hair was pinned up in a chignon with silver pins. She scanned the view ahead and located one of the hostiles firing from the cover of some quartz rocks.
Ready?
Pop 'em up!
Kiss was telekinetic. She focused her trained mind and exerted a little pressure. The quartz rocks scattered apart across the slime, revealing a rather surprised man holding an auto rifle. His surprise lasted about 2 seconds, until a single shot from Nail hit him in the brow and tumbled him leadenly onto his back. With a spiteful grin, Kiss reached out again and dragged another of the hostiles out into the open with her mind. The man yelled aloud, scared and uncomprehending. His heels churned in the ooze and he flailed his arms, fighting the invisible force that yanked him by the scruff of the neck. There was a blurt of noise like an industrial hammer drill, and the man ceased to be, shredded into pieces by heavy fire. Matthewin had shot him. His left hand was a burnished chrome augmetic, and he had locked it into the governing socket of the lethal rotator cannon that he was wearing strapped around his torso. The multi-barrels whirred and cycled, venting vapor. The firing ceased.
They have fled for now. They will return. I have no doubt.
The master of the team moved up amongst them. To the uninformed, Inquisitor Gideon Ravener appeared to be a machine rather than a man. He was a box, a smoothly angled wedge of armored metal with a glossy polished finish from which even the approaching lightning seemed unwilling to reflect. This was his force chair, his life support system, totally enclosed and self-sufficient. The chair's anti-gravity discs spun hypnotically as he advanced. Inside that enclosing chair, one of the Imperium's most brilliant inquisitors and most articulate theorists lay trapped forever. Years before, at the start of a glittering career in the service of the Ordos, Gideon Ravener had been struck down during a heretical attack. His fair and strong body burned and fused away into a miserable residue of useless flesh. Only his mind had survived. But such a mind! Sharp, incisive, poetic, just, and powerful too. Kiss had not met a psi-capable being remotely strong enough to master Gideon Ravener. They were sworn to him, the 5 of them. Nail, Thonius, Kara, Matthewin, and Kiss. Sworn and true. They would follow him to the ends of the known stars, if needs be. Even when he chose not to tell them where they were going.
The Divine Fratery practices a barbaric initiation process of voluntary blinding. Sight, as one might expect, is considered their fundamental skill, but not sight as we might understand it. Novices sacrifice one of their eyes as proof of their intent, and have that missing eye replaced by a simple augmetic to maintain everyday function. The one remaining organic eye is then trained and developed using ritual, alchemic, and sorcerous processes. An initiated member of the Fratery may therefore be identified by his single augmetic eye and by the patch of purple velvet that covers his remaining real eye at all times, except for circumstances of cult ceremony. A novitiate, self-blinded in one socket, must work to fashion his own silver mirror before he is allowed his augmetic, or indeed any medical or sterilizing treatment. He must cut and hammer his dish of silver, and then work it with abrasive wadding until it is a perfect reflector to a finesse of .0088 optical purity. Many die of septicemia or other wound-related infection before they accomplish this. Others, surviving the initial infections, spend many months or even years finishing the task. Thus, members of the cult may additionally be identified by blistering of the skin, tissue abnormalities, and even significant necrotizing scarring incurred during the long months of silver working. It is also my experience that few Fratery members have codable or matchable fingerprints. Years of scrupulous endeavor with abrasive wadding wear away hands as well as silver.
Overhead, the sky flashed and vibrated. Kara could hear the thunder now and felt the drizzle in the wind. Fog vapor smirched out the distance. With the toe of her boot, she gingerly rolled over the body of the man Nail had shot. He was dressed in cheap, worn, foul-weather clothes, made of woven plastec fiber and leather. He had one augmetic eye, crude and badly sutured into the socket, and a velvet patch over the other.
Anyone we know?
Unlike the others, Nail and Kara had not been recruited for Ordo service by Ravener himself. They had originally owed loyalty to Ravener's mentor, Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn. Somewhere along the line, a decade or more past, they had become Raveners. Kara often thought of Eisenhorn. Stern, fierce, so much harder to bear than Ravener. Eisenhorn had still been a good man to follow, and she owed him. But for Gregor Eisenhorn, she would still be a dancer-acrobat in the circuses of Bonaventure. She often wondered what had become of her former master. She'd last seen him back in '87 during the mission to 5213X. He'd been a wreck of a man by then, supported only by his burning will and fundamental augmetics. Some had said he'd crossed a line and become a radical. Kara didn't believe that. Eisenhorn had always been so hard-line. She thought of him fondly, as she did the others from that time. Elizabeth Beckwin, God Emperor, rest her, dear Amos, Medea Betancourt, and Fischig. They had known some times together, great times, bad times, but this was her place now.
Face doesn't ring any bells.
She reached down and lifted the eye patch, just out of curiosity. A real eye, wide and glazed, lay beneath.
What the hell is that about?
Kara reached up and sleeked the short red strands of her rain-wet hair back across her head. She looked across at Matthewin and Thonius beside the other body. Thonius was, as ever, elegantly dressed, and as he crouched in the mud, he fussed about his shoes. Thonius was Ravenous pupil, which supposed that one day Thonius was to be promoted to full Inquisitor. Ravener had been Eisenhorn's interrogator. Kara wondered sometimes if Karl had anything like the same stuff.
If you'd left him a little more intact, we might have made a more decent examination.
Thonius complained.
This is a rotator cannon, it doesn't do intact.
Thonius prodded the grisly remains with a stick.
Well, I think we've got an augmetic eye here too, and what's either an eye patch or a very unsatisfactory posing thong.
Thonius's caustic wit usually drew smiles from the band, but not this night. No one was in the mood for laughs. Ravener, generally so forthcoming with his team, had told them virtually nothing about the reasons for coming to Malanta. As far as anyone knew, he'd simply diverted them to this remote waste world after receiving some private communique. Most alarmingly of all, he'd chosen to join them on the surface. Ravener usually ran his team telepathically from a distance, via the wraithbone markers they all wore. He only came along in person when the stakes were high.
Let's move on.
The grotto in the eastern Telgs is deep in the smoking darkness of the forests. The glades are silent, except for insect chitter, and wreathed with vapor and steam. There are biting centipedes everywhere, some as long as a man's finger, others as long as a man's leg. The air stinks of mildew. Once every 38 days, the rising star comes up at such an angle it forces its pale and famished light in through a natural hole in the rock face outside the grotto. The beams streak in down an 80-degree angle to the azimuth and strike the still, fresh water of the pool in the grotto's base, lighting the milky water like a flame behind muslin. The Fratery cowers around the pool after days of ritual starvation and self-flagellation, and attempts to interrupt the falling beams with their silver mirrors. At such times, I have observed, they remove the purple velvet patches from their real eyes and place them over their augmetics. Their flashing mirrors reflect many colors of light. Having ingested low seeds and other natural hallucinogenics, they glare into their mirrors and begin to gabble incoherently. As the light fades again, the masters of the Fratery play back the vox corders and tease out the future truths or lies that they have been told.
The tower, as they approached it, was far larger than they had first imagined. The main structure, splintered and ruined, rose a full half-kilometre into the dark, bruised sky, like an accusing finger. At the base, like the bole of an ancient tree, it thickened out and spread into great piers and buttresses that anchored it into the headland. Crumbling stone bridge spans linked the rocky shelf to the nearest piers. There was no way of defining its origin or age, nor the hands, human or otherwise, that had constructed it. Even its purpose was in doubt. According to the scans, it was the only artificial structure on Malinter. Older star maps referred to it simply by means of a symbol that indicated ruin, antique, Xenos. As they picked their way through ancient screes of rubble and broken masonry towards the nearest span, the rain began to lash down, pattering on the mud and driving off the raised stonework. The rising wind began to shiver the glossy black ivy and climbing vines clinging in thick mats to the lower walls.
This message, it told you to come here?
What message?
Nail frowned and looked at the floating chair.
The message you got.
I never said anything about a message.
Oh, come on, fair play. Why won't you tell us what we're getting into here?
Talon.
Ravener's voice sliced into Nail's mind and he winced slightly. Ravener's telepathy was sometimes painfully sharp when he was troubled or preoccupied. Nail realized that Ravener's thought voice was directed at him alone. A private word the others couldn't hear.
Trust me, old friend. I dare tell you nothing until I'm sure of what we're dealing with. If it turns out to be a trick, you could be biased by misinformation.
I'm no amateur.
The others looked at Nail, hearing only his side of the conversation.
I know. But you're a loyal man. Loyalty sometimes blinds us. Trust me on this.
What in the name of the Golden Throne was that?
They'd all heard it. Ravener and Kiss had felt it. High in the ruined summit of the tower, something had screamed. Loud, hideous, inhuman, drawn out. More screams from other non-human voices answered it. Each resounded both acoustically and psychically. The air temperature dropped sharply. Sheens of ice crackled into view, caking the upper sweep of the walls. They moved on a few meters. The keening wails grew louder, whooping and circling within the high walls as if screaming avian things were flying around inside. As lightning accompanies thunder, so each scream was accompanied by a sympathetic flash of light. The psychic shrieks seemed to draw the storm down until a halo of flashing, jagged light coruscated in the sky above the tower. Corpuscent danced along the walls like white fluorescent balls. Kiss, her size-sensitive mind feeling it worse than the rest, paused to wipe fresh blood off her lip with the back of her Gwell-skin glove. Her nose was bleeding. As she did so, the hostiles began trying to kill them again.
The divine phratery, may the Ordos condemn their sick souls, seek to chart out the future. All possible futures, in fact. With their mirrors and their abominably practiced eyes, they identify events to come and take special interest in those events that are ill-favored. Disasters, plagues, invasions, collapses of governments, heresies, famines, defeats in battle. Doom in any guise. The masters of the phratery then disseminate the details of their oracles to the lower orders of their cult. By my estimation, the phratery numbers several thousand, many of them apparently upstanding imperial citizens, spread through hundreds of worlds in the subsectors Antimar, Helicon, Angelus, and Ophidian. Once a prospect, as they call them, has been identified, certain portions of the cult membership are charged with doing everything they can to ensure that it comes to pass, preferably in the worst and most damaging way possible. If a plague is foreseen, then cult members will deliberately break quarantine orders to ensure that the outbreak spreads. If the prospect is a famine, they will plant incendiary bombs or biotoxins in the Munitorum grain stores of the threatened world. A heretic emerges. They will protect him and publish his foul lies abroad. An invasion approaches. They are the fifth column who will destroy the defenders from within. They seek doom. They seek to undermine the fabric of our Imperium, the culture of man, and cause it to founder and fall. They seek galactic apocalypse, an age of darkness and fire, wherein their unholy masters, the ruinous powers, can rise up and take governance of all. 5 times now I have thwarted their efforts. They hate me and wish me dead. Now I seek to derail their efforts a 6th time, here, tonight, on Malinter. I have journeyed far out of my way, pursued by their murder bands, to carry a warning. For I have seen their latest prospect with my own eyes, and it is a terrible thing.
Lasfire scorched across the mossy span of the bridge arch, sizzling in the rain. Some of it came from the ruin ahead, some from the crags behind them. Stonework shattered and split. Lasbolts and hard rounds snapped and stung away from the age-polished cobbles.
Go!
Mael turned back towards the crags and fired his weapon in a 2-handed brace. At his side, Kara Swole kicked her assault weapon into life. It bucked like a living thing, spitting spent casings out in a sideways flurry. They backed across the bridge as the others ran ahead. Matthewin and Kiss led the way, into the gunfire coming out of the dim archways and terraces ahead. Matthewin's rotator cannon squealed, and flames danced around the spinning barrels. Stone debris and shorn ivy fluttered off the wounded walls. Kiss saw a man, almost severed at the waist, drop from an archway into the lightless gulf below the bridge. Ravener and Thonius came up behind them. Thonius was still gazing up at the scream light tearing and dancing around the tower top overhead. He had one hand raised, as if to protect his face from the bullets and laser fire whipping around him.
Concentrate.
Yes, of course.
Matthewin ran under the first arch into the gloom of the tower chambers. His augmetic eyes, little coals of red hard light gleaming inside his lids, immediately adjusted to the light conditions, and revealed to him the things hidden in the shadows. He pivoted left and mowed down 4 hostiles with a sustained belch of cannon fire. More shot at him. Kiss ran in beside him. She had a las pistol harnessed at her waist, but she hadn't drawn it yet. She extended the heels of her palms, and 4 kine blades slipped out of the sheaths built into the forearms of her shirt. Each was thin, razor-sharp, 12 centimeters long, and lacked handles. She controlled them with her mind, orbiting them about her body in wide, buzzing circuits, in a figure of 8, like some lethal human orrery. A hostile opened fire directly at her with an auto pistol, cracking off 4 shots. Without flinching, she faced them, circling a pair of the blades so they intercepted and deflected the first 2 shots. The second 2 she bent wide with her mind, so that they sailed off harmlessly like swatted flies. Before he could fire again, Kiss pinned the hostile to the stone wall with the 3rd kine blade. Matthewin was firing again.
You okay there, Kiss?
Fine.
She was in her element, dealing death in the name of the Emperor, punishing his enemies. That was all she lived for. She was a secretive being. Patience Kiss was not her real name, and none of the band knew what she'd been baptized. She'd been born on Sameter in the Helican sub, and had grown to womanhood on that filthy, browbeaten world. Things had happened to her there, things that had changed her and made her Patience Kiss, the Talakine killer. She never spoke of it. The simple fact was she had faced and beaten a miserable death, and now she was paying death back, in the God Emperor's name, with souls more deserving of annihilation. With a jerk of her mouth, she tugged the kine blade out of the pinned corpse and flew it back to join the others. They whistled as they spun, deflecting more gunfire away from her. 5 more hostiles lay ahead, concealed behind mouldering pillars. With a nasal grunt, she sped the kine blades away from her. They shot like guided missiles down the terraceway, arcing around obstacles, whipping around the pillars. 4 of the hostiles fell, slashed open by the hurtling blades. The 5th, she yanked out of cover with her telekinesis and shot. Now, at last, the gun was in her hands. Inexorable as a planet moving along its given path, Ravener floated into the gloom, passing between Kiss and Matthewin as the ex-bounty hunter hosed further mayhem at the last of the hostiles on his side. Thonius ran up alongside him.
What now? At least we're out of that ghastly rain.
Screamlight echoed and flashed down through the tower from far above, reverberating the structure to its core. Kiss shuddered involuntarily. Her nose was bleeding again.
Carl. Zeph.
Ravener's mind voice was quiet, as if he too was suffering the side effects of the psychic screams.
Rear guard, please. Make sure Kara and Harlan make it in alive.
But...
Matthewin was already running back to the archway.
Do as I say, Carl.
Yes, Inquisitor.
Thonius turned and hurried after Matthewin.
With me, please. Patience.
Kiss had just retrieved her kind blades. She held out her arms to let them slide back into her cuff sheaths. The concentrated activity had drained her telekinetic strength, and the terrible scream light from above had sapped her badly.
Are you up to this?
Kiss raised her las pistol.
I was born up for this, Gideon.
She grinned.
The prospect is, as most are, vague. There are no specifics. However, it is regarded as a 100% certainty by the masters of the Freightory that a demonic abomination is about to be manifested into the material universe. This, they predict, will come to pass between the years 400 and 403 M41. Emperor protect us. It may have already happened. There are some details. The crucial event that triggers the manifestation will happen on Eustis Majoris, the overcrowded and dirty capital world of the Angelus subsector, within those aforementioned dates. It may, at the time, seem a minor event, but its consequences will be vast. Hundreds may die, thousands, mayhap millions, if it is not stopped. The demon will take human form and walk the worlds of the Imperium undetected. It has a name. Phonetically, Slight, or perhaps Sleet, or Slight. It must be stopped. Its birth must be prevented. All I have done in my long career in service of the Ordos, all I have achieved, will be as nothing if this demon comes into being.
It's getting a little uncomfortable out here.
A lash shot had just scored across the flesh of Nail's upper arm, but he didn't even wince.
Agreed.
Kara ejected another spent clip onto the cobbles of the span and slammed in a fresh one. They'd been backing steadily under fire, and now the archway was tantalizingly close. They both ducked their heads instinctively as heavy fire ripped out of the archway behind them and peppered the landwards end of the bridge span. Matthewin was covering them at last. They turned and ran into cover, bullets and lasfire chasing their heels. Inside the archway, Thonius was waving them in. Matthewin's cannon ground dry, and he paused to pop out the ammo drum and slap in a fresh one from the heavy pouches around his waist. Nail bent in the shadows and reloaded his pistol quickly, expertly. He looked up and stared out into the torrential rain. Out there, in the dark of the storm and the swiftly falling night, he counted at least 9 muzzle flashes barking their way.
How many?
This time, Matthewin didn't answer. He turned his stony, hard light gaze towards Kara and raised an eyebrow.
15!
15, that's 5 each.
Hey, there are 4 of us here.
I know,
Nail grinned.
but it's still 5 each unless you intend to surprise us.
You little bastard.
He raised his weapon and pinked off several shots at enemies across the span.
Still 15.
Kara, can you join us?
On my way, boss.
She grinned at Nail.
Can you deal here? I mean, now it's 7.5 each.
Get on.
Nail started firing. Kara dashed off into the darkness behind them. Thonius blasted away. They all saw a hostile on the far side of the bridge, through the rain, tumble and pitch off the crag.
There!
Looks like it's 7 each now, Harlon.
The divine phratery, as I have learned, find it particularly easy to identify in their prospects others who have dabbled in far-seeing and clairvoyance. It is as if such individuals somehow illuminate their life courses by toying with the future. The bright track of one has attracted their particular attention. It is through him and the men and women around him that the prospect of the manifestation has come to light. He will cause it, him or one of those close to him. That is why I have taken it upon myself to warn him, for he is my friend, my pupil, my interrogator.
Kiss hadn't even seen or sensed the cultists behind the next archway. Ravener, gliding forward without hesitation, pulped all 4 of them with his chair's built-in psi-cannons. Kiss followed him, striding forward through lakes of leaking blood and mashed tissue. She was worn out. The constant screams were getting to her. They heard footfalls behind them. Kara Swole ran into view. Kiss lowered her weapon.
You called for me?
Indeed I did, Kara. I can't get up there.
Kara looked up into the gloomy rafters and beams above them.
No problem.
She took off her coat. Beneath it, she was dressed in a simple matte green body glove.
Hey, Car. Good luck.
Kara smiled. She limbered up for a moment, and then leapt up into the rafters, gripping the mouldering wood and gaining momentum. Rapidly, all her acrobat skills coming back to her, she ascended, hand over hand, leaping from beam to beam, defying the dreadful gulf beneath her. She was getting increasingly close to the flitting source of the scream light. Her pulse raced. Grunting, she somersaulted again and landed on her feet on a crossmember. Kara stood for a moment, feeling the streaming rain slick down over her from the tower's exposed roof. She stuck out her hands for balance, the assault weapon tightly cinched close under her bosom. There was a light above her, shining out from a stairless doorway in the shell of the tower. Faint artificial light illuminating the millions of raindrops as they hurtled down the empty tower shaft towards her.
Are you seeing this?
Yes, Kara.
What you expected?
I have no idea.
Here goes.
She jumped into space, into rainfall, into air. A hesitation on the brink, dark depths below her. Then she seized a rotting timber beam and swung, her fingers biting deep into the damp, flaking wood. She pivoted in the air and flew up into the doorway, feet first. She landed firmly, balanced, arms wide. A figure stood before her in the ruined tower room, illuminated by a single hovering glow globe.
Hello, Kara. It's been a long time.
Oh, God, Emperor. My master.
The man was tall, shrouded in a dark leather coat that did not quite conceal the crude augmetics supporting his frame. His head was bald, his eyes dark-rimmed. He leaned heavily on a metal staff. Rainwater streaming off him, Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn gazed at her. Down in the archway, Thonius recoiled in horror.
I think we have a problem.
Don't be such a pussy.
Actually, I think you might be right. That's not good, is it?
Nail craned his neck to look. Something blocky and heavy was striding towards them over the bridge span. It was metal and solid, machined, striding limbs hissing steam from piston bearings. Its arms were folded against the sides of its torso like the wings of a flightless bird. Those arms, each one a heavy las cannon, began to cough and spit. Massive hydraulic absorbers soaked up the recoil. The archway collapsed in a shower of exploding masonry. Nail, Thonius, and Matthewin fled back into the cover of the gallery behind.
Emperor, save me! They've got a bloody dreadnought!
Rainwater dripped off Eisenhorn's nose.
Gideon, is he with you, Kara?
Yes, he is. Thorn, it's good to see you.
And you, my dear. But it's important I speak to Gideon.
Kara nodded.
Where me?
Far away, down below, Ravener heard her. Kara's swole stiffened, her eyes clouding. The wraithbone pendant at her throat glowed with a dull, ethereal light. She wasn't Kara Swole anymore. Her body was possessed by the mind of Gideon Ravener.
Hello, Gregor.
Kara's mouth said.
Gideon, well met. I was worried you wouldn't come.
And ignore a summons from my mentor, phrased in Glossia. Thorn wishes Talon. I was hardly going to ignore that.
I thought you would appreciate a taste of the old private code.
Eisenhorn's frozen face failed to show the smile he was feeling.
How could I forget it, Thorn? You drummed it into me.
Eisenhorn nodded.
Much effort getting here.
Kara's lips conveyed Ravener's words.
Some. An effort made to kill us. Nail is holding them off at the gateway to the tower.
Old Harlan, eh? Ever dependable. You've got a good man there, Gideon. A fine man. Give him my respects. And Kara, too. Best there is.
I know, Gregor.
A strangely intense expression that wasn't her own appeared on Kara's face.
I think it's time you told me why you brought me here.
Yes, it is. But in person, I think. That would be best. That way you can stop subjecting Kara to that effort of puppeting, and we can be more private. I'll come down to you.
How? There are no stairs.
The same way I got up here.
He looked upwards, into the rain hosing down through the broken roof.
Cherubel!
Something nightmarish up in the strobing screenlight answered him. Its pitted steel hull glossy with rain, the dreadnought machine strode in through the shattered archway. The booming storm threw its hulking shadow 100 jagging directions at once with its lightning. Its massive cannon pods pumped pneumatically as they retched out streams of lasbolts. The weapons made sharp barking squeals as they discharged, a repeating note louder than the storm. Behind it, 36 armed brethren of the divine freightory charged across the bridge span. Stone split and fractured under the bombardment. Pillars that had stood for eons teetered and collapsed like felled trees, spraying stone shards out across the terrace flooring. Nail, Matthewin, and Thonius retreated back into the empty inner chambers of the ruined tower. Even Matthewin's rotator couldn't so much as dent the dreadnought's armor casing.
Someone really, really wants us dead.
Us. Or the person we came here to meet.
They hurried down a dim colonnade, and Nail shoved both his comrades into the cover of a side arcade as cannon fire, bright as sunbursts, sizzled down the chamber.
Golden throat, there's got to be something we can try.
Matthewin reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 3 close-focus frag grenades. He held them like a market seller would hold apples or ployings. It was just like Matthewin to bring a pocket full of explosives. He never felt properly dressed unless he was armed to the back teeth.
Don't suppose you've got a mini nuke in the other pocket?
My other suit is at the cleaners.
They'll have to do. We'll go with what we've got.
Nail looked around. They could hear the heavy clanking footfalls of the dreadnought bearing down on them, the hiss of its hydraulic pistons, the whir of its motivators.
They may not even crack the thing's plating.
As well as a supply of ridiculous ordnance, Zeph Matthewin could always be relied on for copious pessimism.
We'll have to get them close.
Wait,
Nail had already taken one of the grenades and was weighing it up like a ball.
Yes, Mr. Nail, we.
Thonius took another of the grenades, holding it between finger and thumb like it was a potentially venomous insect. He really wasn't comfortable with the physicality of fighting. Thonius could hack cogitators and archive stacks faster than any of them, and could rewrite codes that any of the rest didn't even understand. He was Ravenor's interrogator because of his considerable intellect, not his killing talents. That's why Ravenor employed the likes of Nail and Matthewin.
3 of us, 3 bombs. We're all in this together. I'm not going to be pulped by that thing without having a go at stopping it myself.
Nail looked dubiously at Matthewin.
It's not up for debate, you Vulgarians. Don't make me remind you I'm technically in charge here.
Ah, that would explain why we're technically nose deep in crack.
A thick section of stone wall blew in nearby, hammered to fragments by withering cannon fire. The massive weight of the dreadnought crushed heat-brittled stone into dust as it stomped through the gap. The trio began to run again, down the next terrace, trying to put some distance between them and the killing machine.
Get ahead. I'll take the first pot.
Nail nodded and grabbed hold of Thonius, who was still puzzling over his grenade, figuring out how to adjust the knurled dial to set the timer. Nail got the interrogator into cover. Thonius straightened his sleeves.
If you pulled my coat out of shape, Nail...
Nail glared at him. Behind them, in the open, Matthewin primed his grenade and turned. As the dreadnought hove into view, he hurled the small black charge. Kara rejoined Ravenor and Kiss like an ape, swinging down through the rafters and leaping the last few meters. Eisenhorn descended after her. He was being carried by a grotesque figure, a human shape twisted and distended by arcane forces. The thing glowed with an eldritch inner light. Its bare limbs and torso were covered with runes and sigils. Chains dragged from its ankles. It set Eisenhorn's heavy, cumbersome form down on the flagstones.
Thank you, Cherubael.
The thing, its head lolling brokenly, exposed its teeth in a dreadful smile.
That's all. I can go back now. There are many more phantoms up there to burn.
Go ahead.
The dreadful demon host zoomed back aloft into the rain-swept heights of the ruin. At once, the ghastly screaming began again. Lights pulsed and flashed. Eisenhorn faced Ravenor's chair.
The Fratery has unleashed everything they have tonight to stop me talking to you. Demon hosts of their own, Cherubael, has been battling them. I think he's enjoying it.
Ravenor used his chair's vox ponder rather than sending.
Last we met, you called that thing an it, my master.
Eisenhorn shrugged. His augmetic sighed with the gesture.
We have reached an understanding. Does that shock you, Gideon?
Nothing shocks me anymore.
Good.
Eisenhorn looked at Kara and Kiss.
We need a moment, Kara. If you and your friend wouldn't mind...
Patience, Kiss.
I know who you are.
Eisenhorn turned away with Ravenor. In a low voice, he began to tell his ex-pupil all he knew about the divine Fratery.
Carl, that's Eisenhorn.
Yes.
Kara was still rather stunned by the meeting, and Ravenor's brief wearing had left her tired.
Everything you and Harlon have said about him, I expected...
What?
Something more intimidating? He's just a broken old man. And I can't think why he consorts with a chaos-filled thing like that host form.
I don't know about the demon host. He fought it and hated it for so long, and then... I don't know. Maybe he's become the radical they say. But you're wrong. About him being a broken old man. Well, he's broken and he's old, but I'd rather go up against Ravenor unarmed than ever cross Gregor Eisenhorn.
Matthewin's grenade exploded. The aim had been good, but the device had bounced oddly at the last moment and had gone off beneath the striding dreadnought. The machine paced on through the ball of fire untroubled. Matthewin dived for cover as the cannons began pumping again.
Crap! my turn, I suppose.
Nail clicked the setter to 4 seconds, thumbed the igniter, and ran out into the hallway, bowling the grenade underarm. Then he threw himself into shelter. The grenade bounced once, lifted with the spin Nail had put on it, and smacked bluntly against the front shell of the dreadnought. It was just rebounding off when it detonated. The dreadnought vanished in a sheet of flame that boiled down the hallway, compressed and driven by the walls and roof. As it cleared, Thonius saw the dreadnought. Its front was scorched, but it was far, far from dead.
Damn. Just me then.
You've dabbled in far-seeing. I know that. Your time spent with the Eldar drew you in that direction.
I won't deny it.
That makes you bright to a freighter. It illuminates you in the interwoven pathways of the future. That's why they located you in their prospects.
Ravenor was quiet for a moment.
And you've come all this way, risked all this danger to warn me.
Of course.
I'm flattered.
Don't be given. You do the same for me.
I'm sure I would. But what you're telling me is crazy.
Eisenhorn bowed his head and ran the fingers of his right hand up and down the cold grip of his rune staff.
Of course it sounds crazy, but it's true. I ask you this, if you don't believe me, why are these cultist fools trying so hard to prevent our meeting here tonight? They know it's true. They want you denied of this warning.
That I will trigger this manifestation, this demon birth.
You or one close to you. The trigger point is something that happens on Eustace Majoris.
Within his force chair, Ravenor was numb.
I won't lie, Gregor. My current investigations focus on that world I was en route to Eustace Majoris when I diverted to meet you here. But I have no knowledge of this slight. It hasn't figured in any of my research. I can't believe that something I will do, or something one of my band will do, will...
Gideon, I can't believe my only ally these days is a demon host. Fate surprises us all.
So what should I do now you've warned me? Abandon my investigations on Eustace? Shy away from that world in the hope that by avoiding it I can also avoid this prophecy?
Eisenhorn's face was in shadow.
Maybe you should.
No. What I should be is careful. Careful in my own actions, careful to oversee the actions of my team. There is truth in the Fratery's prophecy. It is surely bound up in the dire conspiracy I am just now uncovering on Eustace Majoris. But I must prosecute that case. I would be failing in the duty you charged me with if I didn't. After all, the future is not set. We make it. Don't we?
I think we do. I hope we do.
Gregor, when have either of us shirked from serving the throne just because we're afraid things might go bad?
We are inquisitors. We seek.
We do not hide.
Eisenhorn raised his head and let the falling raindrops patter off his upraised palm.
Gideon, I came to warn you, nothing else. I never expected you to change your course. Now, at least, you're aware of a might be. You can be ready for it. That's all I wanted.
Far behind them, the sound of rapid cannon fire and dull explosions echoed through the tower.
I think the time for conversation is over.
Thonius's pockets were not full of munitions and ordnance like Matthewin's, but he reached into them anyway. In one, a mini cogitator. In another, 2 data slates. In a third, a clasped leather case in which he had wrapped his tools. Files, data pins, fine brushes, tubes of lubricant, a vial of adhesive, pliers and tweezers. All the bric-a-brac that aided him in conquering and tinkering with cogitators and codifiers.
Carl! Get into cover!
Thonius slid out the vial of adhesive and wiped the drooling nozzle down the side of the grenade ball, waiting a moment for it to get contact tacky. Then, taking a deep breath, he leapt out of cover into the face of the dreadnought and lobbed the grenade. It hit the front casing and adhered there, stuck fast. Matthewin threw himself out of cover and tackled Thonius, bringing him down behind a pillar. The grenade exploded.
You see? You see how thinking works?
But the dreadnought wasn't finished. The blast had split its belly plates, but it was still moving, still striding, still firing. Thonius shrugged.
Okay, we're dead.
The dreadnought suddenly stopped blasting. It faltered. A chill swept over the chamber. Ravenor's chair slid into view, heading towards the killer machine. With the force of his mind, he had momentarily jammed its weapons. Sudden frost coated the walls, Ravenor's chair and the dreadnought. The machine tried to move. Cycling mechanism shuddered as it attempted to clear its guns. A tall figure strode past Ravenor, heading for the dreadnought. It held a rune staff in one hand and a drawn sword in the other. Its robes fluttered out behind it, stiff with ice.
Holy Zara! Eisenhorn!
A second before Ravenor's mental grip failed, a second before the cannons resumed their murderous work, Eisenhorn swung the sword, Barbarisator, and cleft the dreadnought in two. The sword blade ripped along the fissure Thonius's cunning grenade had put in it. Eisenhorn turned aside and shielded his face as the dreadnought combusted. He looked back at them all, terrible and majestic, backlit by flames.
Shall we?
With their dreadnought gone, the remainder of the freightery force fled. The warband and the two inquisitors slaughtered many as they made their escape into the storm. Tugging one of her kind blades out of her body with her mind, Kiss watched Eisenhorn ripping his way through the faltering hostiles around them.
Now I see what you mean,
she said to Kara Swole.
I'm done here.
Eisenhorn looked back across the bridge span to the tower. Scream lights were still dancing around the summit.
Cherubael needs my help now. I should go and see how he's doing.
I will be vigilant.
Eisenhorn knelt and pressed his gnarled hands flat against the side of the chair.
The Emperor go with you. I've said my piece. It's up to you now, Gideon.
Eisenhorn rose and looked at the others.
Mamselle Kiss. Interrogate her. Mr. Matthewin. A pleasure meeting.
He nodded to each of them.
Kara.
She smiled.
Gregor?
Never a hardship seeing you. Look after Gideon for me.
I will.
Eisenhorn looked at Harlan Nail and held out a hand. Nail clasped it with both of his.
Talon. Like old times.
Emperor protect you, Gregor.
I hope so.
Eisenhorn walked away, back across the bridge span towards the tower where the screen light still flashed and sparked. They knew they would not see him again. Unless the future was not as set as it seemed. Malinter fell away below them, vast and silent. Nail piloted the transport up into low orbit, flashing out signals to their ship. Once the nav was set and automatics had taken over, he turned his chair on its pivot and looked at Ravenor.
He wasn't the same.
How do you mean?
He seemed so sane I thought he was mad.
Yes. I thought that too. It's hard to know whether I should believe him.
About what?
About the dangers ahead, Han. The risks we may take.
So, what do we do?
We carry on. We do our best. We serve the Emperor of mankind. If what Gregor said comes to pass, we deal with it. Unless you have a better idea.
Not a one.
Harlan Nail turned back to study the controls.
Good.
Ravener wheeled his chair around, returning to the cabin space behind where the others were gathered. Nail sighed and looked ahead at the turning star fields. The future lay ahead, its back to them, saying nothing.